Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys another weekly reading wrap up. So I'm going to discuss all the books that I read from October 11th to today, which is October 18th. So I have 6 books to talk about today, and that's almost 1 book per day, which is amazing. And I've been reading a ton of just awesome books this month. So I don't have any books that are under a 4-star rating to talk about today. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So first up, we have Blood and Honey by Shelby Mahurin. First of all, I mean, this cover is absolutely stunning. So this is book 2 in the Serpent and Dove trilogy, and this is a YA fantasy about a witch named Lou and a witch hunter named Reed. And in Serpent and Dove, the first book, they have to get a marriage of convenience because they end up in a compromising position. And this takes place in a France-like kingdom. Yeah, this is the map of Belterra. It's a very France-like island slash country. As you guys probably know, I have already talked about this book quite a bit on my channel because it was featured in a book haul. I also talked about it in my most anticipated releases for the fall. And I told you guys that I was wary going into this because most people that I follow on Goodreads have been giving this like 3 stars. And I've heard that the main gripe is that it does suffer from that middle book syndrome. And I do think that this book does suffer a bit from middle book syndrome. Now, this book has a completely different vibe from Serpent and Dove because in this book we're now dealing with the fallout that happened at the very end of the first book. So our characters are in a very different situation right now, and there is a lot of downtime, a lot of strategizing going on. So I definitely agree that not a ton happens in this book until I would say the very end gets pretty exciting. There are quite a few fight scenes throughout this book because bad guys just randomly show up. I swear every other chapter there was a new fight scene because a random bad guy would show up. And after a while, it just kind of got predictable and bland, and that's really weird when I'm talking about fight scenes, which are something that is really exciting and can add a lot of life into a story. Yeah, I don't know, I just found the amount of fighting to be a bit too much. I don't know, it was just weird. I think the reason why I did end up giving this 4 stars though is because I really enjoy Shelby Mahurin's writing style. I really like the cast of characters that we follow as well. Lou and Reed as a couple, I mean, in this book they kind of fight a lot, but they do find their way back to each other by the end of it. So I mean, I wasn't too annoyed by their antics by any means. And overall, I liked the premise. I didn't love it, but like I said, given what happened at the end of the first book, I feel like this is kind of how this book needed to play out in a way. And what I did appreciate about the author's note at the end is that Shelby Mahurin is very fully aware of how difficult it can be to write a good sequel, as well as a sophomore novel, because Serpent and Dove was her debut. And you can tell that she put a ton of work into this, trying to make this installment work as much as possible. So while I understand why this book didn't work for a lot of people, for me it did. I mean, it's a solid 4-star for me. I am very intrigued to see what's gonna happen in the 3rd book because I feel like a lot needs to happen for this whole series to wrap up. Next up, I have 2 books in the Bloodline series by Rochelle Mead. So these are books 4 and 5. We have The Fiery Heart, which is book 4, and then Silver Shadows, which is book 5, which I literally just finished the audiobook right before pressing record. This is another series that I've been talking about a lot recently on my channel because I did include it in my favorite autumnal reads video. If you want to check that out, that will be up in the cards above. So for those of you guys that don't know, the Bloodline series is a spin-off of the very popular Vampire Academy series, and this series definitely has a completely different vibe to it. We are of course following different main characters, but what's really cool is that there are still characters from the Vampire Academy series that make cameos in this one. And our 2 major characters are Sydney Sage and Adriana Boshkov, and what I adored about this 4th book, The Fiery Heart, is that we finally get Adrian's POV. In the first 3 books of the series we only got Sydney's, which is fine, but I loved being in Adrian's mind and seeing his motivations for why he does the things that he does. It was also really interesting to see how his use of spirit magic affects him and his mind, because in this world, Moroi vampires, which are like the good vampires, they can also use magic, and so most Moroi can use one of the 4 major elements, so air, water, earth, and fire, but Adrian has the use of spirit, which is kind of like a psychic magic. So yeah, that was another reason why it was really great to be in his POV. Shelmy definitely stepped things up with this 4th book and with the 5th installment, Silver Shadows, which, like I said, I just finished this before pressing record. I ended up actually giving this 5 stars. The Fiery Heart I gave 4 stars, but it might be more of like a 4.5. But this is the first book in not only the Bloodline series, but in the Vampire Academy universe that I've given 5 stars. This book was just absolutely amazing. Again, we got Adrian's POV as well as Sydney's, and especially the last couple of hours of the audiobook was just non-stop action, very anxiety inducing, very suspenseful, and I just thought that it was really, really well done. So if you're someone who has read the Vampire Academy series but you haven't checked out this series yet because maybe you think that you're too old for these books because they are YA, or you know, maybe you think that you won't like them for some reason, I wholeheartedly recommend checking out the Bloodline series. Like I said, it has a very different vibe from the Vampire Academy series. It also just feels more mature and sophisticated. I would even say that it borders new adult because our main characters are like 19, 20, you know, in their early 20s. So if you love paranormal romances, what are you doing? You need to read this series. Next up, we have Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a reread for me. I read this for the first time back in 2018, and I've talked about this on my channel a lot recently as well, but I decided to reread this October because when I listened to the audiobook the first time, I definitely missed some things because I was driving a lot while listening to it, as well as like cleaning my room and things like that, so I zoned out at points, and that's not because of the quality of the book by any means, that's just my brain, but I am so happy that I ended up rereading this because I did pick up more things upon reread. And also what I found really interesting is that I actually now interpret the ending differently than I did the first time that I read this. So this is a YA thriller. I think it's one of the best YA thrillers out there. So we have 2 POVs. We have Sadie as she's trying to find her younger sister's killer, and then in the present we have Wes McCrae, who is a podcast host. And now Sadie has gone missing, so Wes McCrae is trying to follow the breadcrumbs that Sadie has left, so to say, and trying to figure out what happened to her as well as what happened to her younger sister. I will never stop raving about the audiobook of this book because it is a full cast of narrators. You can just tell that the level of production is on another level. I cannot recommend it enough. And what's also interesting is that I found that I forgot a lot of the plot twists in this, so when they came up upon reread, I was shocked again, which was fun. Also, this does have an open-ended ending, so if you don't like those, maybe don't read this, but I personally think that Courtney Summers does those just so well, and this is just one of those books that it's really dark. There are trigger warnings for sexual assault, but also abuse of minors, so be aware of that before going into it. It is definitely a book that's going to stick with you after reading it. Oh, and I did end up giving Sadie 5 stars upon reread, so the next 5-star read I want to talk about is The Unrequited by Saffron A. Kent, and this is a pretty dark new adult romance. And after reading this, I definitely want to check out more of Saffron A. Kent's books because I think that she's a fabulous writer. While I was reading the ebook version of this, I was highlighting so many quotes because it was just so well written in my opinion. The basic premise is that we're following Layla. She's in college. She has been obsessed with her stepbrother for years and years at this point. And now she's in therapy because she thinks that she did something really awful to him before he left for college. So she's in a very dark place. I mean, this book can be very depressing at some points. I do want to point that out. Also, if you love Lana Del Rey, this is literally the perfect romance for you because she references Lana Del Rey songs all the time. And I was here for it because I like her music. But yeah, if you like love Lana Del Rey, this is the book for you. But Layla ends up stumbling into this poetry class and she immediately falls for the professor of the class, whose name is Thomas. This is kind of an age gap, but not really, because I think she's in her early 20s and I think he's like 29. So she does quickly become obsessed with Thomas and she kind of becomes a stalker, which is a common thread in her life. And so going into this, I thought it was going to be more of a thriller because I didn't think that Thomas was going to reciprocate her feelings, which is why I thought it was called The Unrequited, but really that's more in reference to the fact that All of her crushes in her life have been unrequited up until this point. Thomas is a very dark and brooding man. He is married, so be warned that there's a lot of cheating in this book, but at the same time, like, the circumstances with his marriage are kind of weird. Like, there's no excusing the cheating, but it's just a different situation than you might think. Layla and Thomas were really interesting characters to follow because we do get both of their POVs. We definitely get more of Layla's POV, but we get a few chapters of Thomas's as well. And the chemistry between the two of them was absolutely amazing. Saffron Kent also writes great smut. So yeah, this is a really great, dark, new adult romance. I could not give it less than 5 stars. Also, I did want to give a couple quick content warnings. So in addition to the cheating, there is also rape and a suicide attempt discussed on the page. It doesn't happen on the page, but it is discussed. So I did want to quickly mention that. And last but certainly not least, we need to discuss The Roommate by Rosie Danan. So this is a contemporary romance that came out, I think, in September, so it's a very recent release. And I've also talked about this book quite a bit on my channel because this was one of my most exciting romance releases of 2020. We are following our main characters, Clara and Josh. So Clara ends up moving to Los Angeles kind of on a whim to be with this guy that she's had a crush on for like 15 years, but he ends up leaving to go on tour with his band, and now she's stuck living with this stranger, Josh. And it turns out that he's actually a porn star, which is very interesting. And of course, a romance ensues between the two of them. And this is one of those books that I went into it thinking it was going to be a 5-star read, and it completely met my expectations. I loved this just as much as I thought I would. And one of the things that I really appreciated about this book, not only the amazing friends to lovers romance, but also, like I said, Josh is a porn star, and what was really great was seeing Josh and Clara collaborate together to take down this company. I think they're called Black Tie or something like that. That's the porn company that Josh works for. And it turns out that they are a very corrupt company. They do not treat their employees well at all, and they're just doing some shady things behind the scenes. And later on in the book, we see that Josh and Clara end up creating their own adult entertainment website, and I think it's more focused on like a podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Just a company that really supports the actors that they employ and, you know, just really treats their employees well and things like that. I also really appreciated that based on the author's note, Rosie Danan did collaborate with some people that are in the adult film industry to really get an authentic view of what that industry is really like. I could just go on and on about this, but this is definitely going to be one of my top favorite romances of 2020. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this weekly wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed. I would also love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. I would also love it if you would click that like button and subscribe, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!